They lay him away behind a shining steel door in a room as cold as stone. And we see ants. We see him now. We look and we see him now, waiting for help, bleeding into the silenced ground, lying in a field beside a road, with the plants flattened beneath him as if he'd fallen from the sky. None of the pain he would have expected, not yet. None of the screaming and panic and flailing around for something to be done. Only this whispering numbness, this stunned state in which it takes him a moment to understand where he is, to understand that some homemade bomb has thrown their Land Rover into the air, has blown another hole in the road, has killed more of his mates and done who knows what to him, lifted him from the surface of the earth and hurled him down into this field of waist-high stalks. The flower heads looking down at him where he lies, waiting for someone to come, for some sensation to come seeping back into his body. The tips of his fingers, the ends of his toes, the blue sky, the poppies, the nodding poppy heads, the smell of smoke and burning and hot baked earth, the sounds coming back with a rush like he was being lifted from water, gunfire and shouts and heavy bootsteps across the dry soil. Faces over him, helmeted faces, and bodies dangling with equipment, and then hands upon him, searching him, cutting away his clothes, touching his face, hands which come away from his body covered in blood. Gloved hands. Voices telling him he's going to be okay. Voices telling him they're going to get him out of there. Voices asking where the helicopter is. Someone saying they were giving him a shot of morphine to keep him going until the helicopter arrived, and everything then okay. The fading away of the gunfire and of everything else. The many hands holding him tight and holding him warm and holding him safe above the good dark earth. We see the poppy heads nodding and bowing in the breeze. We see the farmers coming to inspect their crops, walking slowly through the planted lines. We see the farmers returning in the mid-afternoon to score shallow wounds in each pod and let the milk-white sap seep out into the warming sun and harden and cool into blisters of blackened gum as he lies there, watching, waiting. We see the gum wrapped in leaves and laid out to dry and sold for good money to men who come rattling into the valley in old Russian saloons with loose floor panels. The sound of the helicopters in the distance. The cars grinding over the mountain passes and turning off the road by an old hill trail. The men slinging the black opium lumps into bags across their shoulders and walking to a pair of old iron shacks beneath an overhanging rock, where boys stripped to the waist are tending fires and oil drums and squatting over fat sackcloth bundles which ooze dark stains into the earth. We see the banked fires beneath the oil drums burning all through the night. Strange light falling through the fields, golden light, faces set against the sky and the sound of a helicopter somewhere and a voice saying, "Hang in there, pal, you'll be all right." Boys' voices chattering on in some language like Afghanistani or whatever it is, boiling up a kettle of tea and chewing on handfuls of bread, pressing the coffee-coloured powder into brick-shaped blocks, the size of those pocket dictionaries the officers use when they're out in the villages winning hearts and minds. Or maybe the size of those fat satellite phones they use for calling down airstrikes. The poppy heads swaying suddenly in a strong breeze, pressing themselves flat to the ground as if ducking for cover, and the helicopter suddenly dropping out of the sky like a what? Like a black mother goose. What were they even doing in bloody hell, man? And all the warm hands lifting him through the air, over the field, into the belly of the mother, and the mother lifting high over the landscape, over the fields and the mountains and the roads and trails which wind almost invisibly through the valleys and passes, over the pair of shacks where the bare-chested boys are bundling up dozens of powder bricks and loading them onto dust-coloured mules who wait patiently in the midday heat before setting off in long, ambling trains through the hills. And the mules keep walking steadily for days, while somewhere overhead, Ant still lies in the belly of the helicopter as it clatters over the landscape, angry and low, its shadow rising and falling as he looks up at the faces around him and feels the warm embrace of the morphine flooding through his broken body, while men with rifles and rucksacks full of heroin scramble over the mountain passes which cross the border into Iran, making their way down to the roads, where convoys of Toyota pickups are waiting to race across the plains towards the city, tensed for battle against the government soldiers who are waiting for them, soldiers who are now checking their weapons and sipping mint tea, listening to the evening's briefing, watching the sun dip behind the mountains and wondering why they should sacrifice their lives to interrupt this torrent of wealth passing through their land on its way to the marketplaces and back rooms of the city, to the Turkish border and far beyond, while they stay here and watch the sun dip behind the mountains and listen to the evening's briefing, and watch through night vision binoculars as shimmering Toyota pickups come racing towards them from out of the moss-green, fearful dark. The same darkness from which the helicopter drops down into Camp Bastion, resting lightly on the ground for a moment, while the many hands carry Ant out into the warm, dusty air, the helicopter already falling away as he's taken through to an operating theatre, where the surgeons are waiting, with forceps and scissors and an electrical saw. And as they pour more drugs in through the hole in his arm, pushing him over the edge into a deep, dark, painless sleep, he sees in a single whirling moment what we all can see. This strange journey the seeping poppy gum takes across continents, from an Afghan field to an English city street, carried by mules and men and pickup trucks, through shacks and labs and mountain passes, across borders, through hotel rooms and tea shops and dark-windowed cars, stuffed into bags and suitcases and petrol tanks, coffee jars, coal sacks, butchers' vans, freight containers, arseholes and vaginas and crudely stitched wounds, forced in and out of desperate bodies, glued in under wigs and false beards and fake pregnant bellies, squeezing into Europe through the narrow gateway of Istanbul and on through the transit routes of Kosovo and Macedonia and Bosnia, bloody Bosnia. Shipments bought and sold by men with dark glasses at cafe tables looking over the sea, suitcases of money changing hands in back rooms and bathrooms, arguments settled by fists and knives and boys with borrowed pistols buzzing past on scooters, the cargo gathering weight and value and bloody narrative as it hurtles on through Italy and Germany and Holland and Belgium and France, and as Ant rumbles his way home in the hold of a Hercules, his leg cut down to a bandaged stump, he flies over an English channel across which the heroin shipments are pouring, in fishing boats and yachts and speeding cruisers, in light aircraft, in the distended stomachs of human mules pacing the decks of passenger ferries, in the backs of container lorries bringing the stuff in by the ton to be driven on to warehouses and safe houses across the country, weighed and cut and bagged again on kitchen tables and workshop benches, sold on and split and sold on again, broken down into smaller and smaller batches until a bald-headed man in a baggy tracksuit gets out of a BMW on the Milton estate, jogs up the concrete stairs of a tower block to the 9th floor, knocks twice on the steel door and walks in. And a few minutes later, a boy in a grey hooded top comes out of the same stairwell carrying a bike and rides off down the hill towards the railway sidings, over the canal and under the motorway and around the roundabout, to the Miller's Arms and the phone boxes where Danny still waits, tutting at the damp ragged note Danny hands him and flicking a bag into the long grass and pedalling away up the hill, looking once over his shoulder to see Danny scrabbling across the ground for the gear and shutting himself in the phone box with Einstein still jumping around outside, laying out his works on the metal shelf and trying to keep his sweating, shaking hands even a little bit still while he cooks up a fix in a blackened spoon. Too much. Holding his breath as he jabs the needle into the filter and draws up the coffee-coloured juice. Too much. He knows it's too much, or he thinks it might be, but so what? He wants to make sure. So what? He doesn't care. Pulling down his soiled trousers and poking a new hole through the scabbing wound over his fem, pushing in, deeper in, and feeling for the vein, feeling for the blood, feeling the pain, the good pain that means he'll be well soon, that all shall be well. And he draws back the syringe a little to see the blood from the vein, to be sure he's got the right place, but there's nothing there. There's nothing there. He moves the needle, he takes it out and puts it in, and takes it out and puts it in, and there's nothing there. So he pulls it right out and wipes it clean on his sleeve and turns to the window and uses the dark night as a mirror to focus in on his neck. He clenches his jaw to make the veins stand out. He chooses a vein and watches closely in the darkly lit glass and pushes the needle in to a good new vein, a clean vein, the blood billowing back into the syringe, and he eases the plunger down, down, and feels the gear charging through his body's borders, around his bloodstream, through his heart and his lungs and his brain, and it feels good, good, good. He feels well again, he feels whole again, he feels sorted at last, he feels what? He feels warm and clean and wrapped up in silk and tissue and cotton wool. He feels the way he felt when he first began. He leans his face against the cold dark glass and looks out at the city, at the lights, at the passing cars, the passing trains, the orange-bellied clouds and the black star-pierced sky, a flock of pigeons silhouetted, and he drops the needle to the floor and presses his hands to the cold glass and slides to the floor and curls up on the floor. All this shall pass, and he waits for all this to pass.